We'll be getting familiar with a third-party package, also known as a software library, named Pandas. Pandas allows us to work on data structured by columns and rows called a data frame. Let's get started. Here are the topics that will be discussed. The first part of the video, I will discuss how to import pandas and load a dataset into a pandas data frame. I use the Gapminder dataset in this video. This is also used in Chapter 1 from the textbook Pandas for Everyone. The data file contains observations related to life expectancy, population, and GDP, among others. Once the dataset is loaded, I'll illustrate some attributes and methods introduced to inspect the data. Next, I'll discuss how to subset portions from a pandas data frame. Other methods will be discussed related to aggregating data for descriptive statistics. The latter part of the video will explain the data structures in pandas as well as broadcasting, something that you've been introduced to with NumPy arrays. Pandas is built on top of NumPy. Both of them are considered to be packages. So many features in the NumPy package could be applied in the Pandas package. Pandas data structures are similar to spreadsheets, which involve data placed in columns and rows. There are two types of data structures when it comes down to pandas. One's called a data frame and the other one is called a series. We'll talk about both of these data structures in the coming slides. Importing pandas involves using the import keyword followed by the name of the package, all in lowercase. It's standard and good practice to use the alias PD for pandas. So when you enter pandas in lowercase, you should also include the keyword as followed by the abbreviations PD. When using this approach to import pandas package, the abbreviations PD must be used when calling any sort of pandas function. It is possible to import pandas without the as PD portion, which will allow you to use functions without using the PD abbreviations. But in this course, you are expected to use the standard approach and always import using the abbreviations. Once you import pandas, you can start loading in a data file. A data file can have different formats. You will use the pd.read_csv function. The function will convert the existing data file format, such as a CSV, Excel, or TXT file, into a data frame. The function will pass in the file path argument, which is where the dataset is located. This could be on your local computer or even possibly on a website. The file path argument is passed in as a string. To do data analysis, you will need to store that data frame into a variable and refer to it in your programming script. Here's some documentation related to the read_CSV function. There are many arguments which could be modified. The file path is a positional argument, so you do not need to indicate the parameter name when passing in the location. However, depending on the original dataset format that will be loaded into your program, you may need to use the SEP parameter, similar to the print function SEP parameter. You'll see in the documentation that this is highlighted in red. The default argument is a comma-separated value. If you are dealing with a data file that is tab delimited, then you would need to use the \t in quotes. The examples here illustrate three different scenarios. In lines 1 and 2, they both have similar file paths except for the data file extensions. The data file is named Gapminder, with one file formatted as CSV and the other as TSV. Line 1 uses the read_CSV function, assuming that the original data file is a comma-separated value file, or a CSV file. Line 2 uses the same function, but the file is assumed to be a tab-separated file rather than a CSV. So the new argument is passed into the SEP parameter to let the function be aware of the format. Depending on the software that you use, it's possible to not include the other subdirectories inside the read_CSV function. So for example, Spider has a feature on the top right where the file path to focus on could be selected. Assuming that the data set that you need to import or load is stored in the selected directory, the information needed in the function changes. So in this example, you'll see in line 3 that we have the read_CSV function passing in two arguments, the name of the file along with its extension, TSV, and the \t. Jupyter's interface does not have a portion where you could select the directory from a dropdown. But as long as you know where the defaulted directory is in Jupyter, you can place that data file in that location and use similar code. A file not found error will occur if you enter the wrong file path, assuming that the file is stored in My Downloads folder. The example on the bottom shows that the file path is missing one more path location, which is the Downloads folder. Because of this, an error is displayed when running the function to load the data. Errors like this one will pop up when the file name extension is not provided. Everything here is case sensitive as well, so you'll need to pay close attention. To avoid this problem, it may be best to include the entire file path, especially if you switch between different software such as Spider or Jupyter. The Pandas package has many attributes and methods. Let's take a look at some that are usually used after loading in a data frame. Pandas contains many attributes that can be used to get more information on a data frame. Some are listed here. These are different from methods, whereas attributes do not transform data and methods do. When using an attribute, you must first enter the variable name given to the data frame followed by a period, then the attribute name. In this example, we have a data frame variable named df, which contains the attribute attached to it, shape. This will return a tuple that provides information related to the rows and columns in the data frame. Particularly, it will give you the number of rows as well as the number of columns in the data frame. The second example has df.dtypes, and this will output all of the columns and the data types that are associated with those columns. The first two columns contain an object data type. In Pandas, all string data types are referred to as objects. You could refer to table 1.1 shown here, which is coming out of the Pandas for Everyone textbook. In addition to attributes, there are some methods that could provide information on the data frame, such as the head method. The head method provides the first 5 rows in the data frame. This example shows the df data frame using the method along with its output. The first column in the output contains the row index numbers. The index column is not considered to be part of the total number of columns when using the shape attribute. Data frames have 2 sets of indexes. The first set has to deal with the rows and the second set has to deal with the columns. So you can see that the rows are indexed starting at position 0 and then it goes in that sequence. Whereas the columns are labels. So you'll notice we have country, continent, year, life expectancy, population, GDP. These are all considered to be column index labels. Now, if these labels were not presented in the data frame, by default, each column would be given an integer, just like the rows that you see here. So the first column would be index position 0. The second column would be index position 1, and so on. The opposite of the head method is the tail method. This will display the last 5 rows of a data frame. Both the head and the tail methods accept a number argument to adjust for the defaulted number of rows to output. We'll take a look at more methods shortly, but these are some pretty common ones to use to get a quick glimpse of the data that you're working with. Pandas allows us to subset a portion of data from the data frame, and this is similar to indexing when dealing with a list data type. Let's take a look. Since data frames contain rows and columns, it's possible to subset either one or a combination of both. To subset a column, you enter the data frame name followed by the column name in square bracket notation. The column name must be entered within quotes. Here's an example of how to subset only the data related to country. The subsetted data is stored into a new variable named country_df. The head and tail methods are used on this variable to inspect the content. The variable contains one data column, which is considered to be a different data type called a series, which is part of the Pandas package. We'll talk more about a series data type shortly, but many of the attributes and methods in Pandas data frame can be used with a Pandas series. Here's an example where we're subsetting multiple columns from a data frame. Because we're dealing with multiple data columns, the subset variable is considered to be a data frame data type and not a series data type. And that is because the subset variable contains data structured in rows and columns. whereas a series is just one column of data. Subsetting rows involves using the loc and iloc attributes with bracket notations. For the most part, both of these attributes can do the same thing, but they have subtle differences which can give you different data. Let's take a look at some examples. Here we have the first 5 rows of a data frame named df. Under this, there are 3 different examples side by side to understand the kind of output that can be displayed based on the numbers inside the square bracket notation of the loc attribute. The first example uses the .loc attribute with a number 0 within brackets. This will only subset the first row in the data frame and output the information which is shown below it. The example in the middle uses the loc attribute along with a colon symbol, which is used to subset a range of rows. So we have 0:1, where 0 is the first row in the data frame and 1 is the second row in the data frame. The colon is used to slice or get a range of rows or columns within the data frame. And lastly, the example on the far right subsets the first 3 rows of the data frame. The difference here, when comparing it to indexing with lists, is that the number after the colon is inclusive. Here's an example showing you the difference between iloc and loc using the same type of slicing. One main difference between iloc and loc is that the number to the right of the colon symbol is exclusive and it will not display that row value. Another difference between iloc and loc is that iloc could use negative indexing numbers, whereas loc cannot. Furthermore, another difference between the 2 attributes is when the data frame that you're working with contains index row labels that are not numeric. This is a neat feature with Pandas which provides flexibility of labeling index values. Here's an example of subsetting data to the sample variable. The contents are then displayed. Next, the index attribute is used on the sample variable to relabel the index values to letters, A, B, and C, making it possible to subset rows using these labels. This could be done using the loc method. But just because the sample data frame now has letters as the index labels, the iloc attribute can still be used for subsetting or slicing and ignores the non-numeric labels and assumes that the first row begins at index position 0 and goes in that sequence. When interested in specific columns and rows of a data frame, you could subset using loc or iloc, but it will require a comma symbol between the row and column value. These 2 examples are taken from the Pandas for Everyone textbook. The example on the left uses the loc attribute. The bracket notation contains a colon to select all rows in the data frame, followed by a comma, leading to another set of bracket notations with the list of column names as strings. The example on the right uses the iloc attribute, but instead does not refer to the column names and uses the column index position numbers. The first column in the data frame starts at index position 0 and goes in sequential order, just like row index numbers. The iloc example here is subsetting the 3rd, 4th, and last column of the df data frame variable. Here's another example of subsetting using the iloc attribute, but with the intent on illustrating how the output is displayed when many rows are selected. It's common for the software to show the first 5 and the last 5 rows of the subset. This is a snippet of the Python documentation related to the groupby method. The groupby method aggregates similar values within a column which could be used for some analysis such as computing descriptive statistics. To demonstrate this method, the first parameter, which is the word by, will be used to enter the column name. The second parameter is access equals 0. And in Pandas, access equals 0 means that we are going to perform this method using a column. Let's take a look at how we could apply the groupby method in our data frame. Using the groupby method alone will result in a groupby object. To demonstrate, here we have the data frame that uses the groupby method to aggregate the year's data column. The result is shown below. We will need to include additional syntax to indicate which data column we want to do analysis on. So let's say, for example, we want to get the average life expectancy of all the observations in the data frame that's grouped by years. That syntax is shown on the right. You can include multiple data columns to group by as shown in the groupby method in this syntax, which contains a list of data columns as strings. The order presented in the list will be how the method will perform the group by. In this example, the year will be grouped first, then the continent. The end result is the average life expectancy for each year per continent in the data frame. The syntax shown here shows three methods chained together. The describe method is very handy as it outputs various descriptive statistics that range from measures of central tendency as well as measures of dispersion. To get the frequencies of values within data columns, you could use the value count method or the nunique method. Several examples are shown here to give you an idea of how they can be used. The nunique method returns the unique observations, while the value counts method provides the frequency of each value occurring in the data column. So as mentioned previously, the two data structures in Pandas are series and DataFrame. They both share attributes and methods, but there are some attributes and methods specific to each one of these data types. A series data type contains only one column of data. A data frame is considered to consist of multiple data columns, where each column can be considered as a series. When you subset a data frame column and assign it to a variable, the subset becomes a series data type. This does not mean that the data frame loses its original content. The subset copies the data over to the variable. The type function is used on the variable that contains all the data from one column of the data frame. You see here that the output is a series. If there's a need to convert the series into a data frame, you could use the toFrame method. The toFrame method is demonstrated on the right side using the series variable life_exp. There may be times when you would need to create a series or a data frame without loading from an existing data file. In this case, the series and data frame functions could be used. The syntax provided here shows an example of how each function is used. The syntax on the left stores a series data column in the my_series variable. Pay attention to the data structure used inside the pd.series function. Also note that series, the S is capitalized. Inside the series function, there is a list of numbers, which happen to be a one-dimensional structure. The syntax on the right contains the DataFrame function, in which inside the parentheses is a dictionary. A dictionary is considered to be a two-dimensional data structure because it contains a key and a value mapped to it. Therefore, the key will be the column label and the value will be the data point. Adding a new data column to a data frame is similar to updating a dictionary using square bracket notation. Let's take a look at lines 1, 2, and 3. Lines 1 consist of df_ex variable, which stores a subset of the last 5 rows of the df data frame using the tell method. Line 2 is a code to add a new data column called add_10. The name of the data frame is entered first, and then a set of square brackets will include the name of the new column entered in as a string. The value 10 is assigned, meaning that the data value of 10 will be assigned in each row of this new column. The copy method is chained to the tell method because modifications will be made to the new data frame. Not using the copy method will result in a warning message when the program executes. All operations done within Pandas data frame are automatically aligned by the index. The code here shows a new column named combined that is added to the data frame df_ex, where each row value will be the summation of its respective life expectancy value plus the value that is inside add_10. The values for each row are displayed in the last column of the data frame shown below this code. Broadcasting occurs when operations are applied across the entire array of values. Since Pandas is built on top of NumPy, the feature is also available using Pandas. A simple broadcasting example is shown here on the right side. The number 10 is broadcasted to the life expectancy data column in the DataFrame. This means that the value 10 will be added to each row within the life expectancy column. The output is displayed below the print statement syntax. Broadcasting does not work on simple Python list data types or other standard Python sequence data types. To use the broadcasting tool, you would need to import NumPy or Pandas and convert the list to the proper data type. Another example of broadcasting is shown on the right. This syntax is inspecting the data inside the population column of the data frame using the greater than 10 million operation. This type of syntax will result in Boolean values for each row in the data column. If we wanted to display the actual values that are greater than 10 million, then it would involve a little bit more syntax. To give you an idea of how this is done, let's take a look at this next slide. For comparison, the syntax on the left is what was shown previously, which includes the Boolean values. When broadcasting, the logical condition is checked for every row in the population column. The syntax on the right involves subsetting the data frame. The numerical results are displayed only if the rows are true, meaning that they are greater than 10 million. Two main differences when compared to the right. An extra set of square bracket notations preceding the data frame and the square bracket notation on the far right with the data column POP for population, which tells the program to only display the population column rather than all the columns. By simply removing the last bracket set that includes a string with POP, this will display the entire subset of the data frame. Each column in the data frame will be displayed. The Pandas library allows for some data visualizations. There are other packages that specialize in plotting that we'll get familiar with, but now let's take a look at some of these examples within Pandas. Here's a snippet of the documentation related to the plot method. To create a plot, you enter the DataFrame variable name followed by a period and then the word plot with a set of parentheses. The plot method accepts arbitrary arguments which could be used to format the plot. Here is a syntax where it involves three methods chained together. We have the groupby method, then we have the mean method, followed by the plot method. The result is a line chart showing you the trend of the average life expectancy for all observations in the dataset. And then the type function is presented to show that this is a series data type. You can format the plot by passing in arguments. These are two plots using different keyword arguments detailed in the Python documentation. Pandas is a very useful library that can handle large amounts of data. We'll build on our knowledge of Pandas and other modules, and we'll also be looking at other types of packages that are built on top of Pandas, just like Pandas is built on top of NumPy. You'll want to practice loading data in and interacting with the attributes and the methods related to Panda. Also, practice subsetting as much as possible because it could be really confusing. Okay, I will conclude this video. Thank you for watching.